Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. Time for another show, and we'll have to make up some news, apparently. Okay, well, as it turns out, actually, there are things being reported, but then there are also things not being reported. Aha! You didn't think about that, did you? Well, in this case, of course, it's the non-reporting of things that everybody else was reporting, and how you should handle it. Donald Trump, I guess, spent his time yesterday out of his room when they let him out, announcing that he would run for president again, like Vermin Supreme. And people covered it, people didn't cover it. Some people did cover it, other people didn't, but that's okay. That's okay. And as he would normally say, some of the cable news networks decided to cover it live. Some did not. Some of the newspapers gave it front page coverage. Others did not. I believe the New York Post went with a small bottom of the page banner, Florida man makes announcement. So that's pretty good. And apparently those who did cover it did frequently note that this person who was announcing the run for president was essentially suspected in all sorts of criminal activity, had launched a coup against the United States government unsuccessfully at the end of his last administration, etc. This upsets Byron York to no end. He's very upset that people would point out that Donald Trump is a criminally minded enemy of American democracy. But, you know, there it is. Poor Byron York. I'm not too worried about upsetting him very much. But we'll cover that and the coverage of the coverage, I guess, because that's more news than certainly more news than the idea that Donald Trump would end up running for president again. I think, he's been saying that for a million years and yada yada. So by most accounts, the speech very boring and dull. And now he's apparently going to end up being angry at people who told him that he should give a low-key speech, low energy, as he would have called it if anyone else had given it. All right, so we got that. And we have news about the lame duck session of the still democratically controlled Congress, things we want to catch up on. I happened to pull up the news from Roll Call because I saw it fly by on Twitter about Democrats mulling debt limit options as lame duck window narrows. That's really all the news you need to know about that, is because, of course, Joan told you all about that yesterday. The mainstream news catching up on that today and letting you know that, yeah, she was right yesterday when she told you that. Although also interesting, always interesting to call up Roll Call and see what ads pop up as a result. Roll Call has a very strange readership profile. It's a very insidery publication, of course. And so very frequently you will see, if you haven't spent any time in Washington, D.C., inside the Washington, D.C. media market, then you might not know this. But of course, I have, unfortunately. And especially back in the days when I was commuting and listening to the local all-news station, the ad buys and things like Roll Call and on WTOP, the local news station, are uniquely Washingtonian, I guess. So the banner ad at the top of Roll Call at the moment is I guess an anti-medical marijuana ad, which is not normally seen. Usually if you're online and you see an ad that has anything to do with medical marijuana, it's certainly pro, if not actually come and buy it here at our local store. And here's the address. This one is, a panicky, take a look at dangerous cure-all claims. Like they're very worried that everybody's going to become convinced that marijuana is a cure-all medication. I don't think that's a huge danger. I don't think it's what most people are interested in, but whatever. But more to the point in terms of uniquely Washingtonian. The other pop-up ad, the one you had to click to get out of your way, was for, I didn't catch the actual name and numbers that go with it, but from one of the defense contractors touting the benefits of its air-to-air refueling tanker, in-air refueling tanker production, and how their tanker is better and has better range and greater capacity and does more things for our troops and for NATO, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, that's like the narrowest target there could possibly be, but in Washington, they regularly bet that the 2 or 3 people professionally interested in making decisions about which manufacturer's tanker plane should be procured for one or another of the armed forces. I mean, the chances are that they are absolutely waking up and reading roll call and listening to WTOP, but the rest of us have to suffer through it. It's weird and it's uniquely Washington, and I thought I might share that with you, that that's the daily Washington experience, commuting to your job and hearing ads for McDonnell Douglas, is that what they call themselves anymore? I don't know, but Boeing has this tanker, and General Dynamics with their hypersonic missiles, and littoral combat ships. Like, oh, I'm in the market for a littoral combat ship. Why don't I talk to the people over at wherever? Like you would call up, it's not like those ads you say, tell me, how can I find out more about littoral combat ships? I'm glad you asked, Joan. Nothing like that. But anyway, just very interesting and very Washingtonian. So much going on in Washington. So much going on in Perva-Lago. Greg Dworkin has collected it all, and we'll discuss one narrow slice of it, I'm sure. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Speaking of narrow slices.
Yes, narrow.
The
I don't know what that means.
Discussion post-election.
So narrow. Yes.
Is so
Maybe?
narrow.
I don't
But people are talking about narrow slices.
Yeah.
Was it a win
Cheesecake.
for the Democrats? Well, they only managed to get a narrow slice of Republicans to vote for them, and therefore that's how they eked out multiple wins enough so that they did way better than anybody expected. Okay, fine. Since I'm a persuasion, I like that way of approaching elections. I think that talking a narrow slice into voting for us and therefore winning is like the greatest thing since sliced bread, if you're going to slice up the
Narrowly
electorate.
sliced bread, even.
Yeah.
For lower calories, yes.
But
All right.
as far as the state of the race right now, John Kovalen, win with JMC, pollster, Republican pollster, sums it up, as he often does every morning. State of the House. This is number XVI.
Uh-oh. All right, yeah, all right. I'm in Roman mode now.
Yeah. Republicans up 217 to 209. I'm laughing because somebody had compared a picture of Blake Masters to one of those middle-level, Roman consuls.
Oh, okay.
Who winds up losing the war, or maybe one of those flunkies, on the Death Star before it blew up.
Hey, what's happening?
Republicans up 217 to 209, adding in those ahead.
XVII.
Makes it a 221-214 Republican House. That may be how it winds up. If there's an upset in California, that'll make it 220. But for the most part, we're talking about 214 to 221. Now, 214 to 221, you need 218 for a majority.
Yes, if it's full.
So 18, 19, 20, 21, does that make it a 4-seat majority?
Well...
Or is it a 3-seat majority? 18, and then 19, 20,
18
21.
will make it a majority, so you have one... You're
so
one
it's a
up if
4-seat
you have
majority.
18. Yes.
Okay, so that's ungovernable, and of course a lot of the discussion, therefore, is about leadership. But to finish this thought first, 9 undecided seats, Democrats lead in 5, Republicans lead in 4. That's how you get to 221, 214.
Okay.
And so that's interesting. I mean, it's how did they get there? David Shore has data to suggest that really what's going on here is that it was a typical midterm election pretty much everywhere except for close contested races that were toss-ups, in which case Democrats overperformed.
Okay.
Okay, fine. How and why did that happen? Was it the money? Was it the way they allocated resources? Was it a leadership thing, or was it completely coincidence, like in my area, which I think? Connecticut 5, our incumbent Democrat, Johanna Hayes, who's a fine candidate, nothing wrong with her, won by a narrow amount. She was running against a Republican moderate, George Logan, who was a fine candidate. They each had plenty of money for ads. They each had a terrible ad campaign, except each side had one good one. George Logan had a good one showing his mom cooking, speaking Spanish with her, talking about how the price of food for an ordinary person just was too much. She doesn't speak English. It was a delightful ad. She's just a lovely, charming lady. And so normalizing him and making him look like not an extremist. Jahana Hayes had one good ad. I think it wasn't even hers. It was the supporting groups. And it was hitting George Logan on gun control and gun safety in a Sandy Hook district. And I think that was effective. And the bottom line is it probably came out, in Jahana Hayes' favor for the simple coincidence that she happens to be from Waterbury, and Waterbury is a population center in this particular district. And so it may have had nothing to do with the campaigns whatsoever, despite the gazillions of dollars spent. Well, and that really bothers the analysts because, how are you supposed to analyze what happened and what we're supposed to do next when it turns out like nothing we ddid really mattered?
It's not that. It's just that you usually point to the wrong things. In this case,
each side did their job, and it was a close race. In a district that was predicted to be a close race. In fact, many people predicted Jahana Hayes was going to lose, and she didn't.
Yeah. But honestly, what's wrong with an analysis that says Jahana Hayes knows more of her neighbors than the other guy does?
Yeah,
that's how it worked.
Had more yard signs, and
whatever
it was.
That's what I would have said for sure.
I know, but the fact of the matter is, I'm stepping back and looking at this and saying, look, California isn't even in yet, so I'm not ready to analyze how many more Republicans voted for how many more Democrats. I don't know yet. Let's count the votes first.
Okay.
And beyond that, it's I'm celebrating because we won in important races, like governor of Arizona.
Yes, an excellent and important race.
And,
it's excellent now.
Anyway. The analysts are saying, yes, but that doesn't mean what you think it means. And I'm thinking, okay, clown emoji.
It
means exactly what I thought it meant. It would be a disaster if she lost, my candidate in Arizona and many other places. And it was wonderful that she won.
Yes.
And so, what about that do you think I don't understand?
I'm not certain. By the way, as you were mentioning, just a word that you threw out for the Republican, the very narrow Republican majority being 4 seats, and that was ungovernable. I just want to point out, only for Republicans is that ungovernable, because for all the achievements...
We have Pelosi.
Yeah, right. And that's the big difference. And just wanted to call that out and say, there you go.
They're going to understand.
There was a 4-seat or less majority for the Democrats throughout this Congress, but all of the things that they got to run on and all the things that they said they were able to accomplish with Joe Biden, all the BFDs, all came out of a Congress with that same ungovernable majority, except somebody was able to govern it.
And that somebody was named Nancy Pelosi.
That's right.
And I think it's only after the fact that people are going to really understand how extraordinary she was. You don't have to love her. You don't have to love the way she does things. But boy, was she effective.
That's exactly right, and worth pointing out. And I think when people were floating, will she stay in leadership now with Democrats in the minority? And it's a maybe. But I have to point out, as much as some people don't like her style, the things that they did with 4 seats, you'll never see it again. Yeah,
you'll never see it again. Exactly right, and you're certainly not going to see it now.
No, well, right. Then they may not be interested in anything. But the things that they say they're interested in, they won't be able to do either.
So speaking of which, Chuck Schumer is going to be a majority leader in the Senate. And, things aren't going to change until we see what happens in Georgia, because then 5149 does change things. It changes committees. It changes subpoena power for committees. It is theoretically possible, for example, that with 5149, the Senate could pick up the January 6th committee's work. They certainly would not do that in the 50-50 Senate, but they might do it in the 5149 Senate. And, of course, legislation gets done easier because you don't have to have discharge petitions for every committee where you're tied, and a whole bunch of other things that I can't think of off the top of my head, but it all matters. And at the same time, because it's a 50-50 Senate at worst for the Democrats, I think that the lame duck session is now no longer going to be about judges.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
that judges aren't important, but you can do judges next year because you still have the majority. What you can't do next year is fix all the problems that Kevin McCarthy is going to do in advance. Here's your opportunity to do
I
it
see.
now. And that's why looking at what happens with debt ceiling and some of these other things is so important. For example, and yes, you can argue it's not enough and it doesn't go far enough and it doesn't do everything you hope for. Same-sex marriage, cloture vote is, or something or other is today. Something.
Yes, right. All right.
But it's coming up, whereas it wouldn't come up otherwise, maybe. I mean, if you had lost the majority, you'd be worried about judges, and your whole focus would be get as many judges as possible. Now that you can push that off until the next Congress, you can look at same-sex marriage. You can look at real legislation that will help to shore up the idea that maybe hanging Mike Pence isn't a good idea, and you should codify the fact that, you got to do what you got to do after you said you were going to do it, after you voted. And those sorts of legislative pieces can come up now and will come up now, and it's important to watch. And again, that's only because the Democrats, kept the Senate. So you can talk all you want about how narrow it was and what that says about American democracy, and Democrats are celebrating a win when they barely won. Yes.
Okay.
We are.
All right.
Because it was a win, and it really matters.
All wins matter.
Well, these wins matter more than most.
Blue wins matter.
Like Secretary of State wins. Like at the state level. Like governorship wins at the state level. They matter a lot. And you can say, well, what does it say about Arizona that Kari Lake barely lost? My first slice at that is it means Kari Lake lost.
Right. She's definitely not governor by some number of votes. How many? The number that it matters at. That's right. The number is she's not governor. The end. Now,
on the pundit roundup, and, it's not something you can play right now, but maybe you can include in the summary. I had a lot of fun with that pregnant pause silence that David Murr did with Mike Pence, but this doesn't lend itself quite the same way, although, if you want to, you could. But it is a Twitter piece from a clip by Vaughn Hilliard.
Okay.
Who I think is from Arizona, but certainly knows Arizona extremely well and was embedded in Arizona. And he just had a summary of how bad Kari Lake was.
Yes.
And it was extraordinary. It was on cable TV. And I'm thinking, this isn't both sides stuff. This is like, this guy's on fire. And it was really quite good. So I sent it to you. If you want to play it, you can. It's not that long. But even if you play a portion of it, I think you'll get an idea of what was going on over there.
Okay. I'll hold on to it for the moment.
Then the other pieces that people were covering was, of course, as you mentioned, the announcement from the Florida man that was pushed to not always the front page. This is Sarah Longwell, a Never Trumper in the Bulwark. Bored, people tried to leave before Trump was even finished speaking. Others simply turned their back to him and talked through his remarks. Keep in mind, these attendees were ostensibly among his most dedicated and connected aides and supporters, and there were even stories online about how some of them tried to leave and security wouldn't let them.
Was it Mar-a-Lago?
At Mar-a-Lago,
where he controls everything. So that's interesting. You can't leave. All right.
Right. Well, that's a safety issue. Bring it up with the governor. Well, I don't think the governor really cares. Although in this case he might.
Maybe.
I know he's a Republican, but he's a Republican, doesn't like Donald Trump, so who knows? So the summary, and this will give you a feel for it, and I think it's remarkable because if you're used to both sides coverage that makes you tear your hair out at least for one day, you could be pleased with this. You mentioned the fact that the Trump announcement was buried in the New York Post. This is AP.
All right.
Donald Trump launches third bid for presidency amid legal probes, blame for GOP's underwhelming midterm results. Politico.
Correct.
Trump, who lost the 2020 election and left the White House under the cloud of impeachment for his role in the January 6 riots, has filed to run for president again.
Okay, so accurate.
Here's some samples. This
cases.
is from the Washington Post. Trump, who as president fomented an insurrection, says he's running again in 2024. New York Times, Donald Trump announced a 2024 run for president, ignoring GOP warnings that his influence is harming the party. And Huffington Post, Donald Trump under active criminal investigation and reeling from disastrous midterm results has announced he will run for president in 2024. And then you can't get more both sides in NPR. This is the NPR tweet. Breaking. Donald Trump, who tried to overthrow the results of the 2020 presidential election and inspired a deadly riot at the Capitol in a desperate attempt to keep himself in power, has filed to run for president again in 2024. We had plenty of criticism and angst about how Trump was covered these last 6 years.
Yes.
This was pretty darn good. This is the way it's supposed to be covered.
All right. Yeah, it's a start. I mean, let's hope they stick with it.
Yeah.
They have it written. Now they just have to
but,
cut and paste.
There's incentive for it. There's an awful lot of Republicans that are pretty sick and tired of him, and apparently some of them work at these news outlets.
Yeah. Well, just cut and paste those things and say, again, Donald Trump, who left the cloud, left a cloud in the White House, probably true also, but left under a cloud of impeachment and fomented an insurrection. Today tied his shoes in front of reporters. That's it. Oh, just put it in everything. Every sentence with Donald Trump in it. Just you'll get your word count pretty quick.
Right.
You got to
so
that
in
point
addition
home.
to that Vanya Hilliard piece on Carrie Lake, this one is also in the pundit roundup, and it's a Ron Filipkowski clip.
Okay.
Of the Charlie Kirk
lots
show.
Of clips. Yeah. Why?
Okay. And it's a 2-hour live election special, and he clipped out the good parts, starting with, we're incredibly optimistic about what's going on, and then the number drops start coming in. And they're not as favorable for Carrie Lake as they thought. And then, as Filipkowski puts it, starts out optimistic, then baffled, then concerned, and ends with Wendy Rogers being on the show.
Okay.
I guess she's a state
Arizona
state level
senator,
right-wing nutjob.
Yes, state senator,
White nationalist.
Right. Outspoken, lots of times saying outrageous things and being retweeted.
And she just doesn't understand. And she says, and it ends like this: we wonder now if we were in an echo chamber. I don't know. I'm just beginning to get some perspective.
Oh.
It's really fascinating as you just watch the it's like watching a speed up of sun comes up, sun comes down.
Funny. All right. And, he's probably exhausted from doing a 2-hour show. My God, how could you possibly?
Right.
But, okay. Good. I'm glad that, on the one hand, it's good news when Wendy Rogers is concerned and wakes up to the fact that she might have been talking to herself the whole time. Another way of looking at it is I don't like when they become self-aware. They might change, but
not
okay.
Like change. I mean, if you're a white nationalist, you're a white nationalist.
I
but,
guess so.
I
don't want to see her become
media
sneaky
coverage is
on
going to, I think, be different this time. Well, how do you know? Well, I'm looking at it.
Okay. Well,
I'm not predicting it.
It could be for the time being.
It
does. You're not saying how long it's going to last. You're just saying it's happening now. Okay. Fair enough.
It's happening now. How long does it last? We don't know. But I think Jonah Goldberg was on the money when he said, just pretty much what you said, that it's not going to last. Prediction, he says, Trump will be pissed by all the reviews saying his speech was boring, and it will leak tomorrow or today that he's mad at the advisors who counseled dullness.
Yeah.
He'll then attempt to do something more outlandish and entertaining to get more attention. And I think, Ron DeSantis is probably going to use that. I'm not at all convinced that Trump's going to be the nominee. Yes, I get the idea that he can have it if he wants it right now, but it's not right now. He's got months to screw up even more, and I think he will. Plus, indictments are coming. So, I think it's more likely DeSantis than not. However, just like Rudy Giuliani seemed like he was a lock, you can't tell these things that far in advance.
Jeb.
You have to include the exclamation mark whenever you mention Jeb's name.
Yes, that's correct. It's hard to do without seeing it in print. But, he's got a long time to screw it up. I think,
what was his name? Senator Thompson?
Fred Thompson?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Inevitable.
Right.
Phil
riding
Graham.
around in a
it's a long
cart.
list.
He did popularize riding around in a golf cart instead of walking. So
Well, he was
that
popular
good.
until, he campaigned.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think, unfortunately, we have to say things like Jonah Goldberg might be right.
Just one time.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's wrong very often, but yeah, in all likelihood, that's it's as easy a prediction as you can make, because this is the pattern with him.
Well,
he'll
he's
get
right
a
this
bad
time 'cause he
review,
agrees
and then
with
he'll right. Exactly. That's the measure.
That's what I'm trying to say.
And, but very easy to predict that he will have a flop of a announcement, and if that's the case and it's reviewed that way, that he'll blame somebody else for it. Melania wrote it, some kind of make something up, and then be angry and demand something spectacular, and that's definitely the Trump MO. If he's unhappy with the coverage he got, then he'll have to do something outrageous and say something on video, and we'll all retweet it around or something.
Right. So there's lots to say. The break is coming up on us much faster than I thought. But
I know.
Matthew Dad points out Rona McDaniel. Rona?
Yeah, right.
Rona with two N's.
Yeah, maybe.
Rona McDaniel, who has presided over Republicans, Nevada, losing the presidency, House, and Senate multiple times, is now going to run for re-election as RNC chair to run the party in 2024. And Matthew Dad said that is really some good news for Democrats.
Yeah, like Dan Snyder holding on to the Washington football team for the rest of the NFC East.
When we come back, Bill Scher has a nice piece in the Washington Monthly about Democrats meddled in Republican primaries. Good.
Oh, all right. Very good. All right, yeah, we'll check in on that. And Rona McDaniel, I guess nobody else really wants the job, I assume. But, yeah, she may be stuck with it forever, and no one else will take it, so they'll overlook her loss.
Will stay as GOP chief in Arizona.
Okay. Yeah, I guess everybody wants to stay where they are.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue. That break did feel like it came up fast, and it felt like it was over fast too.
Well,
okay.
That's what happens when you win elections. Just time flies by.
Right.
So, there's these leadership elections going on right now, as I started to say before the break. Chuck Schumer is majority leader, and he's there. But on the Republican side, the minority leader is and will be Mitch McConnell, but not without a challenge.
All right.
We talked on the show last time, I think, about the fact that luminary Republicans, the kind that are backed financially or otherwise by Ginny Thomas, saying, put this off. Don't elect him right away.
Oh.
And McConnell saying, I have the votes. Come on. Let's be real. And Rick Scott saying, no, I'm going to challenge you. And McConnell saying, over what? Your performance, your stellar performance in this Senate election? And Rick Scott is saying, no, you are doing everything wrong. You have your thumb on the scale on everything, and you suck. And McConnell telling his people, I do suck, but that's not the point. I get it done for you.
Okay.
And so that's probably going to carry the day, and he will remain as minority leader because he takes the lightning rod stuff, and he does get the incumbents reelected. Again, This is an inside game thing in the sense that when they are talking about this in public, what they're really talking about is, are you good for me? When you don't have all the money in the world, which would be the Democrats, you have to play it differently than when you have all the money in the world, which is the Republicans. That is to say, if you don't have all the money in the world, especially on the House side, you're going to shore up the incumbents.
Yes.
You're not going to spend money on maybe if we win that, that'll give us an extra chance to get, an extra seat. Incumbents first.
Usually the case.
Men, women, and children. Well, women and children go on the lifeboats first, and then the men's.
Yeah.
Well, incumbents go first, and then we'll figure out what to do with the rest of the money if we have any left.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for that.
And there's a lot of reasons for that, but so McConnell basically said, I'm going to protect my incumbents, and Scott said, let's go for the big picture, and let's go for broke, and let's also get a whole bunch of people that support Donald Trump, and I support Donald Trump, and let's make this a more right-leaning party, and let's make a radical break with the way we approach things. And McConnell's thinking, well, I've been doing this for a long time, and it works, and I'm not changing, and I'm going to squash you like a bug when it comes to election time. So I don't know when that election will be, but McConnell will win it. On the House side, as you mentioned, people are asking Nancy Pelosi to stay. I don't know if she will. I don't know if she won't. I do know if she wants to be minority leader, she's minority leader.
Yeah.
She may not want it. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, including taking care of her husband at this particular point in time. Mm-hmm. But new leadership on the House side. On the Republican side, there was just an election for Senate Majority Leader.
Yeah.
And although Kevin McCarthy won, he didn't do it with 218 votes.
Oh, well, they don't have that yet. Yeah, now it's...
if he had, it would be a show of strength. He didn't have it.
Yeah.
There's about 30-some-odd people who refused to vote for him.
They're all odd.
And he has to win them over in order to be the speaker, and it's not clear he can. One person we were talking on the break or before the break that he did get was Marjorie Taylor Greene. The best guess that everybody has is that, of course, he promised her she could be on committees and maybe even committee chair for all I know. And he has her vote, her announcing that it would be terribly disruptive if he wasn't, because who else could do it? And everybody else in the Freedom Caucus is saying, what are you talking about? He's out. I'm not voting for him. Matt Gaetz says, I'm not voting for him ever. Never, ever.
Well,
Andy Biggs says, I'm running against him.
Yeah, but that's okay. It's over now. It's a good question as to what happens. They have their internal vote first, only the Republicans, and that's rarely going to be, whenever there's a challenge, obviously, it's not going to be unanimous, but it was as close to unanimous as they could get. There were 31 votes for Biggs, and I guess Biggs was one of them, and what they need, the issue though, is if they only have the one seat, if they end up with the one seat majority, they need 30 of the 31 to vote McCarthy on the floor.
But this is the equivalent majority the way we counted it.
Yeah. Yes. If it came out to, what did we say? 218, 222?
221.
Okay.
Let's call it 221. So 18, 19, 20, 21. It's a 4-seat majority. You only need 218. So he can't afford to lose more than 3 votes.
Right. And one of them might be in line at Subway at the time. You never know what could happen with these guys.
Or have COVID.
Right.
Oh, and of course, we talked about this on the show. What's the first thing he did? He said, as soon as I am speaker, we're getting rid of this proxy voting.
Yes.
He said that.
He did.
We predicted he would say that. He said that.
Right. Further, the prediction is that he says he'll do that, gather the 218 votes he needs, including the 30 or so who say, in order to get my vote, you have to get rid of proxy voting, become speaker, and then at some point later, if necessary, say, we're bringing back proxy voting.
Yeah. So, as soon as he gets COVID, then it'll be back.
Right, yeah. So, that may be the measure. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I guess, she jumped on board early because she was able to cut a deal, although I'd love to know what the deal was. If the deal was, I'll put you back on committees, that was coming anyway, but she's that dumb that it might have worked. But she might get a prominent seat on a prominent committee as opposed to just being tucked away somewhere in garbage land. And there may have been some promises about granting her seniority that she ought to have accrued, things like that. If she's smart, which she's not, she would have negotiated for those things. So we have to wait and see what the terms of her deal is. But this vote that they had the other day is the internal Republican conference vote. It's like the primary, Biggs versus McCarthy. And now that the primary is over, and when the floor time comes, they will nominate Kevin McCarthy and no other Republicans for the speakership. Then, and the margin will be that close. Then the question is, are there Republicans who want to be the ones? And remember, they call you by name and you stand up on C-SPAN and shout out who you're voting for. So are there enough Republicans who are willing to stand up on camera, shout out a different name such that the House is plunged into chaos and there's a possibility of some sort of moderate coalition speaker being put in place who maybe wouldn't grant committee seats to Marjorie Taylor Greene? I don't know.
That's the thing. I don't know either. And whereas you say that's not going to happen.
I do say
this year, it's probably not going to happen, but who knows?
Yeah, right. It's not. It never happened before. But then again, insurrection, yada yada. It's just tourists. I love the guy who sent the insurrection to kill me. Maybe, it could happen. I don't know who they would unite behind. But the best analogy to try and figure out, how likely is it? Is look down in Georgia. There's plenty of people, plenty of white supremacist type voters in Georgia who say to themselves, look, I love Republicans because they're white supremacists, but I can't take their recommendation to vote for this idiot, Herschel Walker. But then election day came around and they went, he's the Republican, Herschel Walker. And they vote. And that's how you'll vote for Kevin McCarthy on the floor to be speaker if you're a Republican in the House.
Mm. So let's handle a couple of post-election articles of interest. Let's do first Bill Scher's piece in Washington Monthly. Democrats meddled in Republican primaries. Good.
This is like meddling in the Olympics.
And I think it's a great headline. The New York Times, plenty of pundits, and even some Democrats clutched their pearls and condemned the practice as unseemly. It wasn't, and it worked.
Very seemly.
Right. Extremely seemly. The seemliest thing one could do. The numbers are in, and the Machiavellian scheme worked. It wasn't really that Machiavellian, but, this is one of these things where it either has to be a disaster or it has to be brilliant. It's not allowed to be, whatever. Mm-hmm. The numbers are in, and the Machiavellian scheme worked. In the 6 races where Democrats got the Republican nominee they wanted after running reverse psychology ads highlighting the candidate's conservative bona fides, Democrats won. They flipped governorships in Maryland and Pennsylvania, which really weren't in doubt, and kept Illinois in the Democratic column, which really wasn't in doubt. And then the really ones that were interesting, the ones that were really interesting were New Hampshire's Maggie Hassan starting the year as one of the more vulnerable Democratic U.S. senators, winning by almost 10.
Yes.
Remember, Trafalgar said that Bolduc would win. New Hampshire Representative Annie Kuster, also Democrat, similarly coasted against an election denier. In Michigan's 3rd Congressional, Democrat Hillary Scholten lost in 2020 to Peter Mayer, who broke ranks and voted to impeach Donald Trump. Merciless Democrats boosted Mayer's GOP primary opponent, the election denier John Gibbs, who, by the way, was an awful candidate. With Mayer out of the way, Scholten ran again and beat Gibbs by 13 points. Okay,
these
so it
things happen.
But wasn't it morally wrong? Didn't it undermine the Democrats' credibility as defenders of democracy if they were willing to risk election deniers being nominated and elected? And I have to say, most of those suggestions were coming from Republicans. Tisk, you all are hypocrite. Well, it wasn't and it shouldn't, says Bill Scher. The Times editorial board argued in August, if Democrats believe that democracy is in danger and they need Republican support, then they've weakened their standing as defenders of democracy by aligning with those who would thwart it. This seemingly high-minded argument overlooks 2 big things. Number 1, the state of the Republican Party. Number 2, who can fix it? And the quick answer to that is no one. See, the point is, it wouldn't matter if you put moderates in those situations. The Republican Party is still the party of Trump and DeSantis, and there's no way Trumpism is going away, and they're still fascists. And so, what are you saying? Are you pretending that, let's say the New York Times had endorsed Peter Mayer in a place that isn't New York? that somehow or other that would have changed everything. It's ridiculous.
That feels
They are who they
ridiculous
are,
as
and
it
nothing
comes
that
out.
you do is going to change them. And as we said during the time that this was happening in, contemporaneous terms, the Republicans are responsible for nominating Republicans. It's got nothing to do with what Democrats do. And if they accurately point out, hey, this guy's really conservative and boosted Trump, and you think that that's gaming the system, well, let's just say that in the general, you are already defining the guy before he even got there.
Okay.
So there's nothing wrong with it.
Nothing.
He writes, election denying Republican representatives are reflective of Republican voters. In exit polls taken during last week's midterm elections, 35% of voters said Biden was illegitimately elected. And again, this is all, one of those glass half full, glass half empty things. 35% of voters said Biden was illegitimately elected. That's terrible. It was 35% of voters. And I'm looking at it and thinking, that's great. 65% of voters didn't think that. And they're the majority. And that's a landslide.
All right. Yeah. Well,
Not surprisingly,
they
they
won't
were nearly all Republicans. Of the
necessarily
61% who said Biden is legitimate, only a quarter were Republicans. So pro-democracy Republicans exist, for those of us who like to persuade in elections. That's important. But they don't dominate the party. For Democrats to stand aside and make it easier for a few more rational Republicans to win elections wouldn't change the balance of power at all. Control of the House can come down to very few seats, as we're seeing. Democrats don't have the luxury to help out any Republican, even a pro-Trump impeachment one, if that Republican's going to play a supporting role in giving House control to election deniers. So, what's the argument against running against a George Logan in Connecticut 5, who's basically a moderate? Because he's going to vote for Kevin McCarthy. And if he votes for Kevin McCarthy, Marjorie Taylor Greene gets committee seats. So that's a hard commercial to make, but a pretty easy decision. Don't vote for him.
Right.
Don't help him. But don't you want to help the GOP get more? No. Why would I want to help the GOP do anything?
I don't know. You wouldn't.
Well, it's better for democracy if the GOP is a strong, moderate, center-right party. Good.
Sure.
Let them
It
vote
is.
to be one. What's that got to do with me?
I don't know. I mean, they have to
That's
make
like,
a choice one way or the
telling
other.
me how I should vote for Kevin McCarthy. It's not my vote. It's their vote.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I guess I still don't see very much wrong with it. They are going to challenge from time to time. I mean, we didn't talk the guy into challenging moderate incumbent Republicans. They already did that. It's just a question of, well, what now that they have said they're going to challenge it, and a significant portion of Republicans say I might support that. What are you going to do?
So what he finishes
gonna
with,
sit there and watch.
democracy needs two reality-based parties. If you're familiar with my past writings, says Sure, and I say this too, I'm a steadfast supporter of bipartisanship, even defending the filibuster. Well, I don't do that, but I do like there to be two parties with different ideas so people get to vote on it in a fair, even playing field, of which we don't have. But in theory, I'm okay with that. Democrats should recognize that rational Republicans exist and find ways to work with them in Congress, but not on the campaign trail. They're under no obligation to handicap their candidates. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
This is hardboard politics. And if you don't like it, talk to Claire McCaskill.
Okay. And if you don't like that, nothing I can do.
Well, she'll explain to you, how she gained her own and won a race. And it worked. And that's the way it goes. And nobody tut-tutted it. And you didn't see all these editorials about it.
Right. And, in the end, you will have talked to Claire McCaskill and, take it or leave it.
So it was 10 years ago. Some things don't change. You still don't help your opponent.
All right. Yeah, well, it certainly don't help them straighten out their party and moderate.
That's up for them to do.
Yeah.
Now,
and they have
this
the
one
chance.
is Benjamin Wallace Wells in The New Yorker, who famously wrote an article about how Republican insiders are convinced there'll be a red wave. Mm-hmm. People were yelling at him, but, all he was doing was reporting what they're saying. And it was really helpful to look at their thinking and thinking, well, you got, these are the kind of reports that say unnamed male Republican analyst or operator thinks that Dobbs is fading. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I know they think that. I know they're wrong.
Well,
I know why they're wrong.
I need you to think that.
but I'm glad to know that they think that. They're going to be very surprised on Election Day. And this time, he writes, the Republicans' post-midterm reckoning with Donald Trump, will the era of stop the steal and the GOP's overt challenges to democracy finally start to recede? Well, we talked about the headlines in the regular press. We talked about how the New York Post and the Rupert Murdoch chains are going to be handling Trump, which is to say they don't want to have any part of him for now. Of course, that could change on a dime. It has before. But for now, that's what it is. And the postmortems, he writes in the New Yorker, are still accumulating, but they already suggest a pattern. The Republicans had no trouble turning out their base. Their struggle was in winning over the independent voters who customarily reject the party in power. And this time around, the GOP had enormous advantages, from the high rate of inflation to the low popularity ratings of the sitting president, according to Nate Cohn of the Times. Republican candidates fared poorly in places where abortion rights were on the ballot. In fact, he wrote a piece today about how Trump probably cost the Republicans 5 points. And in places where the party's candidates had backed Trump's challenges to the election, Democrats also made much of Republican plans to weaken Medicare and Social Security. The electoral problem was simple. The Republicans were too extreme, and not just on one issue, which worked in many places but couldn't work in all places. Didn't work in Florida, but it worked in a lot of the toss-ups.
Yeah.
Now, DeSantis' ascent on the national scene is a reflection of his political success in Florida, having won the 2018 governor's race by 33,000 votes. He was reelected on Tuesday by more than 1 million, turning a state nearly as populous as Australia from purple to red. He made significant gains among Hispanic voters, and perhaps most alarmingly for Democrats, won Miami-Dade, traditionally a Democratic stronghold. But it's hard to see what solution he would offer to the extremism problem. And it's a cynical kind of choice, but in one important way, it might also signal some small progress. The glimmer of hope in this election lies in the scattered indications that the era of stop the steal and the Republican Party's overt challenges to democracy may be receding. Quietly, even the most ostentatious election deniers who lost on Tuesday promptly conceded defeat. The exception, of course, this article was written before, is Carrie Lake, who said, "Oh, this election was bullshit."
Hey,
and you know what? That certainly was a good reflection of her candidacy. So I think the self-reflection is appreciated, even though that's not how they meant it. So DeSantis didn't much differ from Trump politically, but he has declined to say that the 2020 election was stolen. And you can trace the effects of the midterms on presidential politics by observing who is acting relaxed and who's anxious. Biden's relaxed, positively ebullient. DeSantis basked in what he called a win for the ages. Trump was frenzied. And that's the urgency that you saw yesterday when he felt like he had to say something. It's interesting that Trump's discussion, shall we say, his speech, his ramblings, looked like it was written by committee. It's like he had one group of people saying you have to be presidential, you have to meet the moment, it's an announcement on the presidency, you got to win over those independents who voted for you last time, and then his own instincts of, I'm just going to burn the place down. And so he didn't know which one to do, and when you try that, all you get is a muddle, and that's what yesterday looked like. Trump was feeling like, I have to announce. I said I was going to announce. If I don't announce, I cede the stage to DeSantis, and we can't have that. So I am pressed to announce, but I'm not ready to announce. I don't really feel like I'm announcing. I'm more angry than ebullient at this particular point in time, and maybe it's not good timing, but I don't have any choice. I have to do it.
Yeah, and well, he may not recognize. I don't know if he knows the difference or feels like there is any difference between any of the speeches that he gives, whether it's at a rally, announcing his run for president, or just reacting to the press in front of cameras somewhere. He just wings it. Right. And I think he may also have felt that contradiction himself. I don't think he wrote the speech himself, but he probably does feel the same thing. I need to be presidential, but then he doesn't know what that is, so he just does his angry thing.
Right. And then I'm going to finish with this last line, which I thought was awfully interesting.
Yes.
Okay. And you have to put this in context of Joe Biden and people asking President Biden, whatever you think of him, he's the president, What do you think of Donald Trump? How do you feel Donald Trump's strength reflects on how the election's going to go? And Biden's reaction was to laugh and say, "Strength? Oh yeah." And well, what do you think about Trump's whatever?
Yeah.
That's been Biden's reaction. Okay, and then so
Okay.
Wallace Wells right. One political truism holds that at any given time, only two people in politics really matter: the president and whoever the president is arguing with.
Okay.
For more
Yeah,
than
I
half a
see.
decade, Trump has been one of those two people.
Yes.
Basically, not anymore.
All right.
Now it's DeSantis.
Starve him.
Yeah, exactly right. And so when you started to see those headlines come in that we started the show with, and then put that in context with this, you see why, well, it may not be that all of a sudden 3 days from now they come right back to doing what they did before. I have to say that trying to analyze how Trump is doing in the Republican Party and will he be the nominee is always incredibly difficult. As Democrats, we can't get into the heads of Republican voters. They're nuts, and we don't understand it, and we should just say that up front. But at the same time, people looked at this election and said, I'm an expert on this. I know history. Here are the fundamentals. The Democrats are going to lose 53 seats in the House, and they're going to lose 3 seats in the Senate. Trust me, that's what the numbers say. I know the numbers, and they were wrong. And so people who look at this and say, well, Trump is Trump, and the media is the media, and they love him, and he's good for clicks, and they're always going to cover him. Well, no. Those are the fundamentals for coverage, and they could be just as wrong as the fundamentals were for the election, because if you look at the coverage now, and we went through it detail by detail, outlet by outlet, no, that's not what's happening.
All
so
right.
your theory of how the fundamentals never change has to account for the fact that the fundamentals apparently are changing.
Oh, well, yeah, that would pose a problem if the theory is, but you have to be willing to negate your thesis if you want to do this scientifically.
Yeah, which is that's a fancy way of saying, well, why don't you just admit you're wrong and you don't know?
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. That was fancy. That's the diploma holder's way of saying it, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that's good. That's why you elite never, get the working class voter, right?
That's right. You have to be willing to negate your thesis.
You have to wear a hoodie.
What? Is that a kind of a coffee that I don't understand? What is that?
Something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, so lots of interesting stuff.
Nitro.
Carrie
cold
Lake's
brew.
actual announcement
Carrie
that
Lake's
she tweeted
actual-
after she
okay.
lost was, Arizonans know BS when they see it.
That's true. And
That is
so
true.
There you have
And
it.
Popat retweeted that with the comment, it was only then that it dawned on Arizona GOP. Maybe taking an opportunistic raccoon who thinks the moon landing was faked and wrapping it in 3 feet of gauze wasn't the right choice for this election.
So
I
it
think
appears.
he's onto something.
Yeah. All right. Well, as long as they know BS when they see it, now they know why they voted the way they did. It was a mystery to me before, but I get it now.
Right. And I'm going to end with this piece, a little analysis piece by Greg Sargent, which I just came across. I knew about
Saved it for last
because I had seen it on
just
Twitter,
found
but I think it's relevant now. John Fetterman made big gains in Trump country. New data reveals how.
How?
New data provided to me by the American Communities Project, ACP, offers a detailed picture of how well this worked. With Fetterman winning his Senate seat by nearly 5 points, the nature of his victory shows how Democrats can continue rebuilding a blue wall in the blue wall states after Donald Trump's 2 campaigns substantially weakened them in the region. Other Democrats succeeded in the blue wall states, of course. Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania for
Same
governor,
state.
Tony Evers, Gretchen Whitmer. But Fetterman's victory might be uniquely instructive. He defeated a candidate, Mehmet Oz, who was conventionally stronger than those other Democrats' opponents. That's true. Josh Shapiro ran an incredibly good race, but he was running it against Doug Mastriano, so in that sense, maybe it doesn't count. But Fetterman, with the stroke issue and running against Oz, who was pretty slick on TV, to beat Oz, you had to come up with something. So he combined an unorthodox issue profile, marijuana legalization, prison clemency. And prison clemency is a good way to fight crime, by the way. Crime, Caravans, crime, the thing that didn't work.
Yeah.
With an unorthodox campaign, a lumbering giant in a hoodie and cargo shorts, helping make very tough political territory more competitive again. Biden won Pennsylvania by only a point. How this happened Fetterman significantly reduced his opponent's margin of victory in 3 types of counties where Trump had done extraordinarily well: middle suburbs, working class country, and rural middle America.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the one we're most familiar with was the middle suburbs. Those are the ones we were hoping would stick with Democrats after rejecting Trump. These types of suburban counties are whiter and more working class than your typical inner ring suburbs, which tends to be a more diverse, cosmopolitan professional. We were kind of counting on those, but we were hoping those more outer ring suburbs would stay with us. We often think of the suburbs as anti-Trump, but his large margins in middle suburbs across the country were key to 2016. 4 years later, when Trump made veiled racial appeals to the suburban housewives of America, these are the places he probably meant to target. But Fetterman limited Oz's margin of victory to 11 points, significantly down from the 15-point margin Trump racked up in 2020. And that mattered because middle suburbs tend to be more populated than most other red-leaning county types. And this data is from Dante Cheney, who's a really good analyst who looks at different parts of the country and what they're like. There's a lot of votes in those places, Cheney told me. They're really important to Republicans, especially Trump Republicans. There's more than a dozen such counties in the state, Cheney said, including suburban counties outside Pittsburgh that still have a blue-collar vibe.
Now, is he saying that it sounded like...
So Fetterman didn't win them, but he lost them by a lot less. And that's what you have to do in rural areas, too.
That strikes me as he's the only one who ran on and won on the Youngkin template, actually. Lots of other Republicans thought they were running on the Youngkin template, meaning I'm going to rant about litter boxes and problems in the schools. But what actually happened for Youngkin was that he made inroads in counties that are traditionally completely out of reach for him, and then racked up what he could in the rurals where Donald Trump did very well. But, everyone pointed at Loudoun County. He targeted Loudoun County. And I keep telling you, he lost Loudoun County. And Republican analysts keep saying, yes, but he lost it by a lot less. And that was the margin.
And that's true.
And that is true. And that's the only thing you can credit Youngkin and his campaign with doing correctly is they peeled off votes. They still lost by a wide margin here in Loudoun County.
Working class counties, Fetterman shaved Oz margin to 27 from 36. So there
right.
we have it.
Yes.
Take care, and maybe we'll do a
reverse.
little bit more of this tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Thanks for coming by. We'll check in with you again tomorrow. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let me just go and see if what I'm seeing here. Okay, I'm just watching the Pennsylvania stuff happening on Twitter, and Adam Bonin commenting on things. I wondered if he was commenting on the article that Greg was just reading to us. I think there's something to that. The idea of a sort of a reverse Youngkin template. I don't know if you would call it, I mean, it's reverse in the sense that it was being used by and worked on behalf of a Democratic candidate versus a Republican candidate. But I wonder if a lot of Republican gubernatorial, or statewide candidates running in places that thought that the key to Youngkin's victory was ranting about schools, and that's how it would work. And, I mean, it could work if the dynamics of your state are exactly the same as the dynamics here in Virginia. If it was a matter of this is the issue that will, and they had reason to believe that it could be. These are the issues that will make people in blue stronghold counties question what's going on and switch over, in not overwhelmingly, but in numbers that make a difference in the statewide vote total, even if I don't win that county. That was what was happening in Loudoun County, although the dynamic that I've been pointing at about the outcome of the Virginia gubernatorial race last time around was a slightly different one, which was that people around the country who observed the race, and there were a lot of them because it's an off-year election, but people who were observing what happened there largely came away with the impression that because Loudoun County was mentioned so much, because it was targeted so hard, because that was where the craziest story that animated the Youngkin campaign was coming from, and then he won, people assumed, and you saw it in the coverage when they said things like, well, Loudoun County really responded to his threats, and this is how they did it, was that they pulled out the demographics of Loudoun County is the wealthiest county per capita in the United States, which is true or nearly true, I think, even though there's lots of places where the wealth that's held vastly outpaces the wealth that's held in Loudoun County. There are a few, as far as it being a wealthy county, I would say on average, it's certainly the case that there's a lot of high earners in the average range here. A lot of professionals, a lot of people who work in Washington, D.C. and who make a very good living. A lot of people in information technology, and that's always been a big boom industry here since it became an industry at all. So there's lots of people making very good money, but it's not like Hollywood or Los Angeles where there's multiple billionaires and any number of millionaires running around. It's not an oil patch where people have tremendous amounts of money. It's just a well-to-do kind of a place, I guess, generally speaking. Highly educated, highly professionalized, and in close proximity to a recession-proof market, in the sense that Washington, D.C. is very often recession-proof. It's referred to that way, mostly because it can make its own economy. In Washington, you want to create jobs in the Washington area, appropriate money. Even in a down cycle, there's plenty of defense money to go around that never gets cut significantly. Well, then, where does it go? To the defense contractor sector. And they're all living around here because they need to meet in Washington and the close-in suburbs where their offices are, so that they can divvy up the Pentagon money. That's the dynamic here. But in pointing to that, and pointing out one where white resentment might have been ginned up, or conservative resentment over changing perceptions of LGBTQ people in general, but among the students in particular, that angle was attacked. There was lots of culture war angles to it, but combined with the focus on Loudoun County and then the reiteration parenthetically that this was a very wealthy county, and then showing the pictures of the mostly white parents. It's a very diverse area, particularly eastern Loudoun, where the focus of the campaign was, in terms of to the extent that it focused around schools. It focused around two high schools in particular, where they were able to gin up all sorts of misunderstanding and resentment about an actual thing that did happen, two sexual assaults in two different schools in the same area of Loudoun County. It's a sizable county, but this was in the eastern part of the county, which differs significantly from the western part. The western part, larger land tracts, horsey country, a lot more wealth that comes from generational wealth, as opposed to highly educated professionals working in a high salaried job over in the east. But combined, they make for a very different picture. But when people heard that it was a very wealthy county and that a very wealthy individual was making inroads there by attacking the school system and waging culture war there, the assumption was, well, the wealthy people went with the wealthy candidate and flipped. They used to be limousine liberals, but now they've come home to become hardcore conservatives, protecting themselves and their money and people who look like them. Except that's just not the demographics of Loudoun County, east or west, and it's not what happened in the election. What did happen, undoubtedly, Youngkin did better in Loudoun County than other Republicans have done of late, but not nearly enough to win the county. That's just the impression people gave themselves when they put 2 and 2 together, except they didn't belong together. It wasn't an addition problem. The wealth of the county and the culture war thing, it didn't mesh, and he lost Loudoun County by 11 points. Similarly, though, Fetterman being celebrated for putting together a win, as he should be, and pointing to these, at least in the case of the outer, what do they call them, outer suburbs, or outer ring, I can't remember exactly what terminology they use, but pointing out that inroads were made there. Not that he even came close to winning those suburbs, just that it was enough to add to a statewide vote total that in other places where he did well and was expected traditionally to be able to do well, he supplemented those votes, which would ordinarily have made it very close, with a bunch of additional votes in places he never came close to winning, but that were crucial to the statewide vote total. That's the comparison I'm making here. So, I don't know, maybe with the benefit of some time to sit down and think about it and a screen to type it on and turn it into something more coherent, you'll hear that analysis coming from somewhere else later on, and we'll read it because it agrees with what we think. And then it'll make a lot more sense. But I think that there's something to explore there. And so, in the role that we play of assignment desk, someone should go and write that article and then share it with us, and then we'll share it with you. How about that? Okay. In the meantime, let's see other things happening here. I note that, our friend Darwin sent us the note about, Trump making his announcement and just making a joke here, but offhandedly saying, okay, so the former president, as he calls him, F. POTUS, has announced, but did he actually submit any official paperwork? Which is always a good question with Donald Trump because, Trump and paperwork, man. And so I put that out there just for fun, and some people very earnestly, in fact, answered that yes, he has, in fact, filed his FEC paperwork, but it should be noted that one, made you look, essentially, is what this is about. You had to check with Donald Trump. With any other candidate, you'd say, well, of course he filed his paperwork with the FEC because that's what you have to do. And anybody who's serious about running a campaign knows you can't get it. Well, but Donald Trump, yeah, he could actually have done it without filing the paperwork. But he did, apparently. Although, as it turns out, there are some questions about that, as I see here. Let's see. Eric Hofpar responded to this by saying, yeah, he did, but I was just kind of explaining, well, yeah, but it's not ordinarily a question with everybody else. You figure he did, file the paperwork. But with Donald Trump, it's not so certain, and maybe you should check into it. And in fact, when he did check into it, he says, I did chuckle at the note at the bottom where he's asked to declare how much of his personal funds he intends to use for the primary and general campaigns, and they are $0 and $0. Now, that's entirely likely that's how that's exactly how he'll treat it. I mean, but of course, you remember that his initial appeal to voters was that he was saying that, you won't have to do that. I can pay for the whole thing myself, and we can have a campaign unlike any other because there'll be that much resources available to me. But of course, he's a liar and a cheater. And when it comes to money, forget about it. You're never going to get any money out of his hands. But anyway, it's there. But even if it's, I guess I'll also point out, it's also likely that it's not really true, that he might not plan on it, but, and maybe then in that sense it is true. I plan to use $0, but very frequently he also loses track of what's his and what he's collecting from other people. I'm sure he tracks his money fairly closely, but there will be times when he will just jump in and say, get this done. I want this done. I want that done. And, I can't wait to raise the money for it, or it doesn't matter if the money is there, or maybe it's restricted in its use. Just do it. Here's some money. Go do the thing. It's very likely that he put no thought into the answer for the questions. And what's the answer I like? $0. I like to be able to think I'm going to use 0 of my own dollars for this. So just put down 0, even if I know that that isn't likely to be the case. Anyway, Trump and paperwork, I'm saying, and there's nothing, I don't think there's anything, you can't throw him out of the race if he didn't file the paperwork, but he made the announcement first. It's not quite like that. So, it's not like a high pressure situation where you have to file the paperwork correctly or else they kill you or something. But that's all the more reason why you should expect that it either didn't get filed or got filed incorrectly. And again, I don't know that it was filed correctly. This was a matter of, did he file paperwork? Yeah, he put some words on paper and they were scanned into the FEC database so that when you search for it, you find that there was paper. Was it filled out correctly? I don't know. Is the name of the person that he put down as treasurer of his campaign committee the actual treasurer? I don't know. Is the phone number right? I don't know. Address? I don't know. The amount of money being declared? I don't know. Now, that's the case with any candidate. It's just that usually the assumption is, probably all correct because most people care about doing paperwork and getting it right. Well, they don't like doing paperwork. They don't care. They just don't want to get in any trouble. They don't want any unnecessary headaches. They make it somebody else's job as it is. So the campaign treasurer has to file this paperwork. Your job is to get it right because if anything goes wrong, they're going to point at me, but I'll be angry with you. So people tend to get it right. With Donald Trump, you already know, even if you get it right, he'll be pointing his fingers at you and blaming you. And they're very tiny fingers. And it's disturbing to see, and it's weird, and you kind of think, why is that guy holding Vienna sausages? And it's all stuff of nightmares. You don't want fingers pointed at you when they're Donald Trump's. Anyway, plus he's got a temper. But, if you can deal with that, fine. It's the fingers that bother most people. But, there's no telling whether or not that paperwork is accurately done and correctly done. And although there's really no reason to believe that it isn't, that's a lie. There is reason to believe that it isn't correctly done, and it's because it was done on behalf of Donald Trump. And that's good reason to bet a small amount of money that there's something wrong with that paperwork. And you should go and check it out. And maybe you'll find it, and then everyone will, congratulate you for your hard work. Okay, let's see. Plenty of other things to check up on. What have I stuck in pocket here that I wanted to bring to your attention? Oh, you know what? It's a good time to take care of a little other business that I have pending. First of all, we'll say this. A big thank you to new supporters of the show who have not yet had their name called, at least of late, for their contributions to the show since, about a month ago, really, honestly. It's not a tremendous number, so, actually it's time to do a new pitch for contributions. This one where we've been using in the podcast is old, and, we should check up on the numbers. But thanks to Denise Hart, who joins us as a supporter. And by the way, remember that there are multiple routes in here. She joins us as a supporter via PayPal, whereas via the Cash app, we have a new contribution from, let's see. Shall we use the wacky email name that doesn't identify you in a way that they could find you in the phone book kind of thing, if there were still phone books? Wallazonia was the wacky email name and screen name through which the request came. I guess on Twitter, you can find Wallazonia and ask then about, hey, what does that name mean? And how easy was it for you to use the Cash App? Just asking questions about whether or not there were other ways beyond Patreon and or PayPal to make contributions. And yes, remember the Cash App, an excellent vehicle for that, run by the people who run Square, so they're very well versed in e-commerce and point of sale, credit card readers, etc., etc. So hopefully, doing a good job on financial security. And also, let's see, Chris McElveen joining us with a contribution and a note the other day. Maybe I should grab and read his note, because I have, note to myself about that, and that he made a very interesting comment that he probably intended to be passed on to the rest of you. But I guess he was talking about, I guess, our my proclivity for, let's say, self-deprecation, and saying, I'm making this contribution, and I'm happy to do it, and I'm proud to do it, and I enjoy the show. This is a paraphrasing thing, but basically, you undermine everything, including my own enthusiasm for when you say things like, and I don't believe I actually said this, but he said, consider that when you talk about getting support for the show and then you say, but I understand, I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I never send them any money, that it undermines the impulse to give to support your podcast too. Now, I'm fairly certain that I didn't say, I understand I listen to a lot of podcasts, but never send them any money, because I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. And I think what I was actually saying is I don't listen to any other podcasts. I don't have time for it. And I'm not a podcast listening type of person. It tends to put me to sleep, even if the content is good. I guess I'm now just visually attuned, and if I'm not watching something on a screen and hearing the audio, if one of those elements is missing, I can't do it. Not that I can't, but it becomes too easy for me to either tune out or have my eye wander or whatever. Now, is it the case that I don't give any money to anybody for anything? No, that's not it either. I'm not a huge donor, but I do like to spread things around and support other things. But I don't listen to other podcasts, not because I don't think anybody does a good job with them, but because I'm doing too many other things during the day, and I can't imagine after sitting and doing my own for 2 hours listening to somebody else's and still getting the work done. But that being said, two messages here that are worth focusing on. One, maybe not all the time with the self-deprecation. That doesn't always work for everybody, although it's an easy out for me. And two, more to the point, I think, is he says, hey, I think maybe an affirmative remark, like I do have a few subscriptions to things I really do care about, and I do have those. But that the story here is that Chris relays in his note that it is, or was very recently, is his birthday. And it was on the 11th that this note came through. So if the 11th is your birthday, happy birthday. But saying, yeah, it's his birthday, and what he did for himself for his birthday. And what a nice idea is support some of the podcasts that he's listened to for a long time. And then I get the note. Of course, this is why I'm able to do this. Feel free to use my story as one of those affirmative remarks about supporting your show. Longtime listener donated to the show as a birthday present to himself. So, how do you like that? I do. I like it quite a lot. And it is an affirmative story. And thank you, Chris, for pointing that out. And, yes, there's certainly work to be done in the method by which we present this. And I think you've done a good job at it. And I'll just steal yours instead. And let everybody. And so if your birthday is coming up, or you have a birthday, for instance, at any point during the year in these 365 days, you should celebrate it in similar fashion, supporting the podcasts you love. And since you're listening to this one, we'll assume that you love this one and we'll support this one as well. But I really do need to organize into a better and more up-to-date and fresher drive just to remind people of the necessity of, yes, supporting the podcast. Okay, so that takes care of some of that housekeeping, I guess. Let's say we also dive back into a couple of other subjects that I've had put aside. Now, I do have, we've been talking a great deal about the big changes in Twitter and the possible migration to other platforms like Mastodon, etc. Mark Hogue, who we knew for many years on Twitter as Asparagus Zucchini, and before that even Thorgama, has made the switch. and has some notes on his experience there and some encouragement and insistence that perhaps it's something we all want to try. Just a brief note, Mark has sent us this pre-recorded bit that I wanted to share with you. Let's let him take it away.
Hello, Kagro in the Morning listeners. Hey, I just wanted to give you a brief note about Twitter and Mastodon. First, you may have noticed in a recent broadcast that I said there's no way Elon Musk is going to go through with that purchase. And it turned out that, well, I was wrong. That was based on a few premises. One, since Twitter stock price had dropped, he didn't have enough money really to draw on. Two, if he sold a lot of his Twitter stock, it would tank the price further, and his co-shareholders would probably sue him over that. Three, it was already way overpriced, and he would also have to take, this is probably number 4, loans at unfavorable rates. And the last premise was that he's a better businessman and along with that, not an idiot. So some of those premises were wrong. And I'm off Twitter because I just couldn't stand to have my participation in that enterprise be of value to somebody else and for him to make money off of it, especially when it's, well, you all know the problems with Twitter now. So I just want to say something quickly about Mastodon, and that is, I don't understand why people say it's so hard. I got on it right when that purchase went through, and it's been great. I like it. I think I like it better than Twitter. There are a heck of a lot of journalists on there now, a lot of people, really interesting people. It's easy to find their accounts and subscribe to them there. And the whole thing about picking a server, it's not a problem. It doesn't matter which server you pick all that much. And you can change servers if you want. But you can see everybody everywhere on Mastodon and other of those kinds of servers in your home feed as soon as you follow them. So it's not a problem. And I hope to see you there someday. And I didn't mention who this is. This is Mark Hogue, also known as Asparagus Zucchini, or Thor Gamma if you've been following long enough. Anyway, cheers.
All right. Thanks, Mark. And that gives me hope that I'll be able to navigate Mastodon. I think what stopped me was what probably stopped a lot of people initially was, you have to choose a server. And although, as it turns out, it doesn't really matter a great deal which one you choose, and you can change, I guess, limited, how often you can change, but it's not a difficult thing. And also you can see messages from people you intend to follow system-wide, no matter what server they're on. But it did stop me like, I should put some thought into which server I decide to join. And I didn't come prepared to spend any time thinking about anything. I was just going to sign up for something, and maybe I better wait. And I don't know. So now I should probably make another shot at it. But anyway, it's good to have a review, not so much, it wasn't really a review of Mastodon, but at least somebody that we know and are familiar with and can trust who says, it's not that bad. It's not that hard. And in fact, I kind of like it better than Twitter. It's not difficult at all. I don't know why everybody turned this complication of having to choose a server into this big mental block. But if you just choose one and get past it, it's pretty easy to use. And that's important information. Glad to know it. I have another thing that I wanted to read here, another email from a friend of the show who had a couple comments to make about polling and how it went this cycle. But it looks to me like, maybe it'd be a little bit long to read before the break. So I'll hold it for after the break, but I'll squeeze this part in. It's from Jeremy Freiberger, a frequent correspondent on the show. And I realized, there was another thing that I meant to share of his that he brought to my attention, and I don't think we ever worked it back into the show. And it was that Jeremy may have had the explanation for the person that I know from real life, not podcast life, who was on vacation in Martha's Vineyard and said he spoke to somebody about the show, and that convinced him that, oh my gosh, you're really famous about that. And I think Jeremy may have had the explanation for that, saying that he had, and I never read this on the show, I don't think, but he had mentioned to us at some point earlier that that he was in fact in Martha's Vineyard to visit with relatives, and didn't have any specific recollection of talking to anybody about it, but that he may have in fact discussed the podcast with people. As he puts it here, listening to the podcast is an important component of my daily routine, as is politics in general. So he may have had that conversation with somebody, and wouldn't that be interesting? So I had put out the call. Which one of you was in Martha's Vineyard? And I don't know. Well, let's see if we can match up the dates with the guys I've been speaking to, and see if that's a match. Anyway, back to the issue of polling and his observations on polling that he wanted to share with everybody after the break, when I have a little more time to fit them all in. Be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. Well, everybody is distracted on Twitter with an announcement that Elon Musk recently made, I guess, sending everybody in the company a company-wide email saying something like, hey, if you're not ready to commit to being totally hardcore, or whatever that is supposed to mean, like working long hours and for low pay, perhaps, I guess, and being very intense about it, then you should, find the exits and get ready to leave, or find yourself dismissed, I guess, is the message. I don't know whether it means anything. I don't know whether he was going to fire everybody anyway. I don't know what being totally hardcore is supposed to mean. And it's the kind of thing that, you should maybe define your terms better if you're going to run a serious business, but he's not going to run a serious business. So there you go. Anyway, so that's happening at the moment, but Jeremy wanted to share with us some polling analysis that he culls from his experience over the past couple of election cycles, and I'll just read you the email as it's in front of me here. While we all continue to parse midterm election results, I have some experience from this cycle that you can throw on the pile, starting in early July and ending in late September. This is an interesting way to, spend your time and watch the polls closely. So just sort of an interesting routine that he developed for himself, starting in early July, ending in late September. I largely relied on 270towin.com, which he describes parenthetically as an aggregator of 9 mainstream polling outfits. 9 times he sampled from the mainstream polling outfits to guide my campaign donations. This is an interesting methodology. I don't think most people have the patience for this, but this is an interesting way of doing it if you're the kind of person who enjoys this kind of intensity in watching these, because there's a lot of, I do find a lot of people will ask that question, and I guess maybe just if you're in political podcasts, the question comes up a lot, if your friends and family know that that's the case, and they'll ask me all the time, well, who should I do? What's the most effective way of donating the limited funds that I've got? And for most of the election, the best I had to point to was curated lists that several people maintained. And I just had to say, well, I can't pick the best one out of these 4 or 5 people, because I would say I trust all of these 4 or 5 people who are keeping these lists. Some of them are more locally focused, some of them more nationally focused, some of them actually attempt to, have a list in every state. But there's a lot of hard work and important work going on. But here's a new methodology that Jeremy describes that maybe might appeal to some of the rest of you who want to have your own curated list, or perhaps just want to figure out what to do with your own money. But again, starting in early July, ending in late September, relying on 270, 270, using the numbers, 270towin.com, which I guess you could call a play on 538.com, because 538, and does everybody know this? I think every time I bring this up and have a moment to mention it, 538 is the number of electoral votes out there that are in the offing in any given election, and you need a majority of them to win. How many is a majority of 538? The answer is 270. You see what's going on here? 270towin.com, the aggregator of 9 mainstream polling outfits, and Jeremy used them to guide his campaign donations. More specifically, regarding House races, I used 270 to win from 9/1, September 1st, to September 15th. Is that right? So the first 2 weeks of September, to help me contribute to various House campaigns that the site ranked in the range between likely Republican and lean Democrat. So in the narrow band of rankings that surround toss-up, let's say. So everything from probably going to win because this district leans Democrat, but they could use some money to help them across the finish line to make sure there's no upset, over to, well, here's likely Republican, but maybe with a couple of dollars we could push it to either flip it Democratic, or it could be, you could be contributing to the Glenn Youngkin, John Fetterman type campaign template, and say, while it would be great to win the House seat in this congressional district, perhaps a different function that we might look at is peeling off votes by doing it from down ballot, right? If you're able to mount a strong campaign in a place that likely leans Republican, in combination with Fetterman campaigning there, say in Pennsylvania, and a local candidate who doesn't have a great chance of winning the House seat in that district, but is putting up a good fight nonetheless and doing a good job of campaigning, maybe you could help push Fetterman over the finish line by convincing people there that they can find an affinity with Democrats and cast some Democratic ballots there, even though it's a largely Republican district. So maybe you could combine those two stories, or that one story, my speculation about that one story, with Jeremy's methodology here. So what's he doing? So in the beginning of September, he's using 270 to win to find campaigns ranked by 270 to win as either between or somewhere in between likely Republican to lean Democrat. During this period in the first half of September, 270 to win noted 73 such competitive races, as they would call them. In addition to supporting many of them, I also tracked how the rating for each of these 73 races changed over time in the run-up to November 8th. So kudos to you, Jeremy, for your dedication to this job. And, by the way, for supporting, or at least even considering seriously supporting, that many congressional campaigns. You're a good Democrat and a good donor. So, in general, he goes on to say, ratings gradually but consistently shifted during late September and early October toward Democrats. And after early October, ratings moved consistently toward Republicans. We noted this trend, and some of it we blamed on the flood of polls although really we were blaming the shift in media outlook, I guess, to the flooding the market with Republican-leaning polls. But this was noticed too, even in a place like an aggregator that deals with just 9 mainstream polling outfits, not taking every poll that's offered and figuring it into their metrics. So that's interesting too. So in early October, or after early October, ratings moved consistently toward Republicans. What I found most interesting, Jeremy says, is how the election results compare to 270 to win's ratings from early September. So maybe this is also a good way of evaluating 270 to win's own methodology, and whether or not this is the site you might want to use for your own handicapping system. Of the 14 races rated likely Republican as of September 15th, only Washington's 3rd District, where Marie Gluesenkamp Perez bucked the prediction, and that was likely only because national media exposed Marie's opponent, Joe Kent, as a fraud. Well, they were all frauds, but I mean, that one in particular got some extra attention. Of the 11 races that 270 to win rated lean Republican, lean R, in mid-September, all 11 did in fact go to Republicans. California's 45th district, as of the writing of the email anyway, still hasn't been called, but incumbent Republican Michelle Steele looks set to win there. Next, they have a tilt R, or tilt Republican category. All 5 tilt Rs went to Dems. That is something of note. Regarding the 13 toss-up races, 2 in California that are trending towards the Republicans, plus Alaska and Maine, both trending D, haven't been called. Otherwise, only Oregon 5, where Democrat McLeod Skinner versus Chavez DeRaymer primaried incumbent Democrat Kurt Schrader's seat. In New York 19th, Riley versus Molinaro, and Virginia's 2nd District, Luria versus Kiggins, went Republican. Dems will wonder if replacing moderate / incumbent, that he is both, he's not that moderate, but if replacing moderate incumbent Schrader with progressive McLeod Skinner cost them a win. I guess they'll have to ponder that. Luria, meanwhile, was the victim of Republican-controlled redistricting, which is amazing because we just reformed our redistricting process in a way that was supposed to be nonpartisan and fairer, but I worried that it in fact would leave control in the hands of Republicans, and it did. Poof. What do you think of that? Yeah, oh well. Anyway, of the 8 races rated Tilt D, remember that all the Tilt R's went to Dems. There were 5 of them. The 8 races were Tilt D on September 15th. California 13 is the only one that hasn't been called. Otherwise, just New York's 22nd district went to Republicans there. So seems like they got it right on those that tilted D, but they got it all wrong on the 5 that tilted R. So interesting. Of the 20 races rated lean D, just New York's 3rd district, where incumbent Democrat Thomas Sozzi ran for governor, and New York 17, where Sean Patrick Maloney lost his race. Those 2 districts, New York went Republican among the lean Ds. Finally, one likely D in New York's 4th district, where Kathleen Rice was retiring, went to a Republican. All others stayed in Democratic hands. Of the 2 competitive seats where Republicans who voted to impeach Trump lost their primary, Peter Meyer and Jamie Herrera Butler, Dems flipped both seats. Herrera Butler was that Washington 3rd district, wasn't it? Of the 2 competitive seats where Republicans who voted to impeach Trump and then decided to retire, Ohio 13 and New York 22, Dems flipped Ohio 13 and came very close in New York 22. And then of the 4 competitive seats where Dem incumbents read the tea leaves on redistricting and or national mood and decided to retire, That would be Arizona, where Ann Kirkpatrick, New York, Kathleen Rice, Tennessee's Jim Cooper, and Wisconsin's Ron Kind, all retired. All of those flipped. A fifth competitive seat occupied by a Dem who bowed out, Suozzi, who ran for governor, also flipped. One has to wonder how many of these Dems might have prevailed if they had stayed in the fight. It looks to me like Kirkpatrick, Rice, and Suozzi would have been reelected. In one competitive race where an incumbent Dem lost their primary, did the seat flip. That was Oregon 5, Kurt Schrader. In the general election, just 6 incumbents in competitive races lost. Arizona 2, Iowa 3, New Jersey 7. Oh, we're talking about, by the way, Arizona 2nd, Tom O'Halloran. Iowa 3rd, Cindy Axney. Is that right? How she pronounces that last name? New Jersey 7, Tom Malinowski, and New York 17, Sean Patrick Maloney. Oh, there's some more other changes. Incumbents, Republican incumbents too. Steve Chabot, who lost in Ohio 13, and back to the Dems with Elaine Luria in Virginia 2nd. Granted, a dozen or so races are yet to be called, yet none of these appear headed toward a surprise. Thus, my 2 cents. So I appreciate having your 2 cents, Jeremy. So I guess, one thing you could take away from it is a fairly good job, I guess, done by 270 to win, with the exception, really, the notable exception of getting 5 out of 5 tilt R seats wrong. But I don't know what tilt is supposed to mean. I guess it was just depending on, it's just before toss up. So, I guess it wasn't a strong feeling for them in those cases. But anyway, interesting methodology, interesting new site to bring to our attention if you're not familiar with 270 to win. Did a reasonably good job. No worse than 538, I would imagine. And certainly no one could do much worse than Real Clear Politics and their aggregators. So, 1, you might have a new aggregator to look at. 2, congratulations and thank you to Jeremy for following so many races and donating to so many and following so closely. And 3, thanks for giving us ideas about how we might target our own giving in elections in the near future. There's only one going on now down in Georgia. That's the runoff where you should be focusing your time, attention, and money if possible. Okay. So let's see. I think that takes care of most of the items I wanted to take care of on behalf of others and listeners to the show and correspondents with the show. And now we can finish up the last segment with what I put aside for you in Pocket. There are a number of things, different directions to go with here. Let's say, and we'll save this one for later. Let's read this one. This is not an article I would ordinarily include because it's from Bret Stephens at the New York Times, which is an automatic turnoff for most of the listeners here. But I wanted to at least make you aware of the fact that Bret Stephens, in fact, gave his column over to Donald Trump bashing. And that might be of interest to you. Like, I know you're insatiable with the Trump bashing. And maybe there's some extra thrill that you can get out of it by knowing that Bret Stephens decided to chime in on this with a piece called Donald Trump is Finally Finished. That was a big trend among the conservative leaning columnists that are not on board with Trump at this point, which was to declare him politically dead in the water. And I don't know whether they're just sort of trying to will it to be so, or whether they really believe that it's true. There was a pretty low energy event apparently last night. And between that and the Murdochs sort of declaring, we're not going to back him this time, but they said that at the beginning of the 2016 cycle too, we're not going to back him. And then, it became inevitable, and then they just jumped on the bandwagon. So I don't know how well this works. Donald Trump was declared, politically dead in the water 10 times during the 2016 campaign too, and he just kept plowing forward and surviving somehow. But for cheerleading purposes, I offer you the fact that Bret Stephens is bashing Trump, and B, the fact that it's done in a fairly cohesive style. Donald Trump is finally finished. Why don't we read it? Again, from the New York Times, obviously. Whether or not Donald Trump's hat is in the ring, the big red one, I guess, he's finished as a serious contender for high office. I wish this were true, but it's nice to hear it said anyway. That's not a line to write lightly, although you did. First, because he has been written off so often in the past, right? It's just, as I was saying, after mocking John McCain's military record, after the Access Hollywood tape, after January 6th, after the January 6th committee hearings, all those times, so many times it's happened that it seems foolhardy to do it again. Second, because every time he is written off, his supporters seem to draw energy from their purported irrelevance. And third, because the line will surely be hung around my neck if I'm wrong. And I don't mind seeing that happen. But I'm not, he says. Last week, the realization finally dawned on his devoted supporters that Trump can no longer deliver what they want most: power. Or, let me put it in language more congenial to them, whatever purpose they believe he was meant to serve, bringing working class voters back to the Republican fold, restoring nationalism to conservative ideology, rejecting the authority of the supposed experts, has been served. Others can now do the same thing better, without the drama and divisiveness. He's yesterday's man. This is an observation made from an objective reading of political reality. Trump cost Republicans dearly in the midterms. Although I think his supporters just say, well, he wasn't on the ballot, and that's really all they need to hear. It's my 2 cents on that. But Brett continues, nonetheless. In key Senate and gubernatorial races, the former president proffered his endorsements based on fealty over electability. He turned election denialism into a loyalty oath. Primary victories became Pyrrhic ones. In the same states where mainstream Republicans won handily, like Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, Brian Kemp in Georgia, Mike DeWine in Ohio, Trump's candidates either underperformed or lost, a contrast that again gives the lie to the notion that Democrats somehow won, thanks only to cheating, bending rules, or taking advantage of early voting. But none of this alone would be enough to turn off Trump's devotees, just as Republican losses of the House in 2018, the White House in 2020, and the Senate in 2021 weren't enough. 3 additional factors were required. The first is shock. Republicans expected a blowout win last week, every bit as much as Democrats expected one for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Many of the polls predicted one, as did the normal ebb and flow of American politics. Joe Biden is an unpopular incumbent presiding over an inflationary economy and a border crisis. That's kind of whatever. Anyway, for the GOP, although they love to use the periods in saying the GOP, so you kind of have to read it that way. For the GOP to underperform so badly is a no excuses moment for the party. And the only coherent explanation for it is the specter of Trump. The second is that Trump is finally being abandoned by many of his usually unflagging apologists and enablers in the right-wing media, whose influence will be felt downstream. That includes Fox News' Laura Ingraham, who is quoted here because it's a Bret Stephens column, and it reads, "If the voters conclude that you're putting your own ego or your own grudges ahead of what's good for the country, they're going to look elsewhere." It includes Town Hall's Kurt Schlichter, who says Trump presents problems and we need to face them. He admitted, "We owe Trump nothing. He's a politician." It includes Victor Davis Hanson. Will an unapologetic Trump instead now escalate his slurs, bray at the moon, play out his current angry Ajax role to the bitter end, and thus himself end up a tragic hero, appreciated for past service but deemed too toxic for present company? Wow, if you thought I was being fancy pants and saying negating the thesis, I don't know who's reading that column. Anyway, none of these are full-on repudiations, though they come close, and they bring us to the third reason Trump is finally finished, his gratuitous pre-election swipe at Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, whose 19-point victory over the Democrat Charlie Crist was one of the GOP's few unequivocal highlights of election night. The sin here was not that Trump violated Ronald Reagan's famous 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of any fellow Republican. Trump has violated that commandment as freely as he had so many of the others. It's that he was a loser criticizing a winner. And what Trump's base wants most of all is a winner. But I mean, that's actually why he did it. I mean, I don't know. That seems to me a misunderstanding of his base to some extent. They do want a winner. And if you do lose and somebody else wins, a way to convince that base that you're still a winner is to attack that winner. Because why would it would never be the case that the loser could attack the winner. That's definitely not the case. But yet this attack happened. So it must be the case that, well, Trump he wasn't on the ballot, so he didn't really lose. The other guy undoubtedly won, but so what? He pwned him. So now he's a loser. I mean, that's kind of all it takes for them. Anyway, a wiser Trump would have made DeSantis' victory his own. But that's very traditional. I don't think that would really going to happen. Treating the governor as his star student and designated successor. But Trump couldn't and can't help himself. And what the Republican base sees in DeSantis is everything it likes about Trump. The combativeness and self-belief and disdain for elite opinion, minus the personal baggage and habits of self-sabotage. In the battle for the affections of American conservatives, the ex-president increasingly feels like the jealous, paunchy spouse, the governor like the attractive and successful neighbor. Anyway, the field of possible primary contenders might still move aside for Trump, much as Hillary Clinton mostly cleared the field the last time she ran. But with this his midterm route, Trump has proved once again that he's toxic and can never again win a general election. Maybe. He would be no match for a younger, charismatic primary candidate, just as Clinton proved no match for Barack Obama in 2008. That certainly appeared to be true. The field is open for a real Republican contender. It's time someone stepped up to the plate. I would say, certainly I have caution for anybody who thinks that Ron DeSantis is that charismatic a guy. He's just not. But I don't know, maybe everybody's into Smurf boots somehow and it'll really work for him, but I don't think so. But I don't know where else they're going to turn. Anyway, I think it was just fun to know that Bret Stephens was saying nasty things about Donald Trump. Not that we ever counted him as a big Trump supporter, but I guess if anybody ever asks you, if you're ever in a debate with him and they ask you, tell me one good thing about Bret Stephens. If you're stuck, you could say, well, there was one time that he said Donald Trump was finished. But then again, the real problem is Bret Stephens is wrong about so many things. Now maybe I've put you in a panic, like, oh my God, Bret Stephens is wrong about everything, and he says Trump is finished. And there's every chance that he's not, and now I worry about it even more because there's the Bret Stephens jinx to worry about. It's a real thing. You could worry about that. Okay. Well, let's see. There's not much time to move on to much else that we have stored away, but we do have Thursday and Friday still ahead of us. So there's plenty of time to talk through some of the other items that I had put aside, including, I guess we can look forward to finding out all the things that you thought were true about Ron DeSantis and his manipulation of the flights of migrants, the Venezuelan migrants to Martha's Vineyard turn out to be, well, they're panning out now that they're able to nail down facts. This mysterious Perla person was, in fact, apparently, there are documents connecting her with DeSantis and other top officials in his administration. Politico reporting that under the headline, new documents show top DeSantis official coordinating with Perla, whoever that might be, over the migrant flights. But I mean, I'm glad to have hard newspaper type, satisfy the legal department evidence of this. But, yeah, I mean, if you thought the opposite was true, you were really kidding yourself. But anyway, it'll be nice to read that proof onto the record. And perhaps during the rest of the week, and maybe for a Friday show, because Friday is great for these sorts of things, perhaps some time spent with CRS documents that will refresh our memories of exactly what has to go on in the first couple days of a new Congress with respect to electing a speaker. What is the process? What are the prospects for chaos and disruption? And what about rules packages and the like? And what are we really going to see come January 3rd if, as is now expected, Republicans hang on to win the narrowest of majorities in the House? Okay, well, we got that on tap for the rest of the week, which I think will serve us well, although there's every possibility of new and crazier stories arising between now and then and disrupting us from getting around to that. What sorts of stories might distract us? Well, maybe a good thing to do would be, of course, to hang around for Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which comes up next right here on Netroots Radio. So whatever you're using to listen to this, if you're listening live, just stay where you are, and you'll have the show available. And by the way, if you're listening via podcast, very easy to find Justice's podcast available as well. Look for his tweets and ours when we see them and spot them and retweet them on Twitter. And, of course, going to netrootsradio.com will help you find the place where he stores those things in case you're listening via podcast and want to pick up on what he's done too. And what has he got in store for you today? Let's see. Our especially, well, I'm trying to read through his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy now open, of course. From 11 a.m. to noon Eastern Time for our especially special daily specials, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays, as he called it. Let's get to the hardcore stuff, as Elon might say. Trump wrongly thinks running again will shield him from the DOJ.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
And what about this? A comprehensive report found new officer training presents an immediate crisis for policing. We'll find out what that crisis is, in case you didn't know. And a bipartisan Senate report detailed aggressive and unethical medical mistreatment of women immigration detainees in ICE facilities. Stay tuned for that and more next.